From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Sir Keir Starmer's given the clearest indication yet there'll be some tax rises in Wednesday's budget. In a speech in Birmingham, the Prime Minister said the government's taking decisions to prevent devastating austerity. Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall's told LBC she hopes voters understand the government's got a tough job turning the country around.
I think people in their own lives know you can't pretend everything's great. You've got to have a plan to fix it, and that's our job. That's what we've got to get over the line.
A judge has warned Tommy Robinson nobody is above the law while sentencing him to 18 months. The 41-year-old, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, repeated false claims made about a Syrian refugee. He'll spend at least half his term in prison. A man who used artificial intelligence to create indecent images of children has been jailed for 18 years. 27-year-old Hugh Nelson from Bolton also encouraged chatroom users to abuse children aged under 13. And Erik ten Hag has been sacked by Manchester United following yesterday's loss at West Ham. The side have won just 4 of their 13 matches across all competitions this season. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 36 points at 82.85. The pound buys $1.29 and €1.19. LBC weather, most areas will have a rather cloudy night with patchy light rain and some fog patches, lows of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
It's Monday evening, it's 1 minute past 8. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. Joining me on the panel, next to me, to my left, Liberal Democrat MP for South Cambridgeshire, Pippa Heylings. She's the party's energy security and net zero spokesperson. Next to her is Craig Mackinlay, Lord Mackinlay. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought it?
Craig is a Conservative peer known as the Bionic Lord after sepsis led to his arms and legs each being amputated last winter. To my right, Sarah Smith is Labour MP for Hyndburn, along with Pippa making her debut, and also David Goodhart, the journalist, commentator and policy analyst. His new book is The Care Dilemma, Caring Enough in the Age of Sex Equality. So we'd quite like a question on that subject, if you wouldn't mind. 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number. You can text 84850. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first caller. It's Chris in Stubbington. Hello, Chris.
Good evening, Ian and panel. The Education Secretary has failed to clarify what Labour mean by working people, amidst confusion over party tax pledges on millions of taxpayers about to be shafted.
Well, the budget's on Wednesday. I suppose there's an opportunity if you want to do that. Now, Bridget Phillipson has said that a working person is someone, quotes, whose main income arises from the fact that they go out to work every day, but wouldn't say whether she thinks a small business owner whose income comes from profits is a working person or not. Sarah Smith, I have to come to you first on this.
I think what's really important is that when we consider the budget as it comes forward on Wednesday, and sadly, sorry to break it to you, but I'm not really privy to much more information than anyone else sitting here. They are exercising very effectively, keeping everybody together on this, and there's not been leaks, which is progress, I think, compared to some of the recent budgets that we might have had prior to the Labour government. But I think,
you're saying there haven't been leaks? What was today about the bus fares all about then?
So I think there's been some managed bringing forward some information different to a leak, I think, when it's managing the narrative. But I think the budget on Wednesday I think needs to be seen through the lens of like 3 clear questions. Is it providing the economy with a vital stability that it needs? And what, business and the business response to it is clearly important to that. I think secondly, is it a budget that lays out how we're going to invest in and improve public services? Because we know that, people can't get the NHS appointments they need. We've got the highest number of people out of work or, in limited work because of their health, and we need to tackle that, as well as, to the point about this Education Secretary, schools that desperately need investment, and we've obviously started to come forward on some of our plans for those schools. And the third test, I think, is it a budget that's going to give the the road forward for economic growth for this country. And what we've committed to consistently is that it will be those with the kind of broad shoulders that are, that we will be looking at in terms of where there may be some tax changes, but that we are not going to break our manifesto promises in terms of keeping obviously national insurance for employees, VAT.
That bit wasn't actually said during the election though for employees. It was just national insurance will not rise. No caveats.
And it's really, really important that we maintain that promise to the employees, and we will be, that we are able to hold to that. As everybody knows, when you look at where the options are for increasing tax revenue, and that is what that is the choice. If we are a country that believes in good public services, which is what we need to get economic growth and stabilise things again, we've got to be able to make that investment. And when you look at the options around, where the levers are, it's very, very important that we hold to the promise that we've made.
What about this definition of working people, which I find it incredible that so many Labour politicians don't seem to be able to understand what that phrase means? What's your definition?
I think my definition is, people for whom their main income is through PAYE, through main employment, and as it's been said, I think by others as well, working people know who they are, and I think that that's very, very clear.
I've started 7 small businesses in my time, and I put all the hours that God could send into those businesses. Very often I didn't take any money out of them because I wanted to pay my staff, and at the end of the month I know what it's like being in a position where you think, well, how am I going to do that? In those businesses, did I not qualify as a working person?
I think the key here is that we've had the last 14 years, and particularly in most recent years, we've had kind of populist politics that want to please everybody, and fundamentally are trying to sell people a lie, which is that we can sort of make false promises around public services and continue to bring taxes down. And what all people want to see, I believe, is value for their money. So we need to show that. And businesses as well, they want to see this. They want to know that their staff can get access to the NHS. They want to know that their kids are getting childcare so that they can do the hours they need to work.
Particularly small business people, want to be recognised by government for what they do. And they need government to understand what entrepreneurs do. Otherwise, if you want growth in the economy, you're not going to get it without those people.
And I think that's as well, we've obviously spent a lot of time speaking to businesses about, a lot of the reforms that we're bringing forward. And many businesses keep saying the same things. They want to see those strong public services. They want to see that people can depend on that, so that they also have the stability for that economic growth as well.
Craig Mackinlay, you've been chuntering.
I have. I've been remarkably restrained, but no, well done, Sarah, for going through the manifesto points. I mean, what is quite remarkable, in the last Parliament, the Labour Party seemed incapable of actually identifying what a woman is. They now seem to be incapable of identifying what a working person is. If I said, what is a working woman, they're probably going to a meltdown with really not understanding that. Now, tax is a very, very delicate animal, especially in a globalised world, because the very wealthy can up sticks and go somewhere else. They can go to Portugal or Italy or Spain, who are willing to sit down with them. And they're, mostly Spain particularly is a more socialist country than here, even under Labour government. And yet they understand that wealthy people spend money in their country, so they warmly welcome them. It seems the Labour Party just wants to drive anyone with wealth or enthusiasm or entrepreneurship away. But you did say something really interesting, and it's what is the status of a sole trader, a small business who may be a shop owner with a couple of staff. Can't do very much to avoid potentially employers' national insurance rise. That will come out of their profits, which means that small business owner taking the risks of and all the problems of a shop and VAT and rents and all of that that's going on.
So what do you suggest?
They will hit. Well, stop spending might help. I mean, let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at your black hole. The black hole nobody seems to be able to identify. You've given £10 billion to public service. Okay, well, discuss. I don't think under us it would have been quite so high. Obviously, some of these would have come through.
Wage increases. But these were on the table. These were proposed.
You're likely to allocate £12 billion in foreign aid to assist in net zero in Africa and elsewhere. I'm not sure that's top of many people's agenda in the UK. £8 billion for GB Energy. God knows what it's going to do. It hasn't actually got any plans on generating any energy. And $8 billion for a sovereign wealth fund, which seems to me is just going to support pet projects that have got no chance in the commercial world of ever actually holding water. So stop spending. And
it was your government that left us with billions of pounds of unallocated costs, promises to people across this country of money they were going to receive that was not in the budget. How can you cannot sit here and lecture us on how to spend responsibly? And GB Energy is because people were hit so hard by the 10% increases in their energy costs because there wasn't a strategy in place and there wasn't a plan for it. And if you're looking at investment in tackling net zero, that's about the long-term
going into energy costs with what you've done to older people. And we've also just had £149 rise at 1st of October. So those promises of £300 less, if you're over an 80-year-old, you're actually going to face £449.
But would you rather that we just left the NHS to go to rack and ruin?
I need to get the other two in as well.
So if you want growth, you've got to make growth. You're not going to tax your way to growth.
Right,
it never happens.
What's your view?
Well, despite the protestations here, it's unquestionable that the Conservatives have left our economy and the NHS in absolute tatters. And so there really are some tough decisions to make. But what we've been saying is be really careful that those are not the burden of fixing the mess that the Conservatives have left is not on ordinary families and small businesses. We've got to be really careful on the cumulative impact of multiple measures that we're hearing that may be in the budget. And we're waiting to see the detail in this. But really, we've put forward lots of measures where we say there are big businesses that have made billions of profit over the last couple of years, despite all of the difficult economic situation. One example for Hams would be the cuts, the levies that the Conservatives brought onto the big banks. So that was £15 billion worth of cuts over the last 5 years. They've had over 40 billion of profit. So we were saying if we reverse those tax cuts that the Tories brought in, we could raise 4 billion just like that. So it's much better to consider these types of measures rather than placing them, unfortunately, on the shoulders of those who really are struggling at the moment. That's what we would like to urge the government.
So if the government in the budget do bring in an increase in national insurance for employers, do confirm, well, Keir Starmer's confirmed it today, that bus fares or the cap is going to be increased by 50%, so that will increase costs for people, for bus users. Will you vote against the budget?
So we would definitely say that the national insurance, the increasing the contributions, the employers' contributions, is again something we need to look at really carefully. What we have to fix is NHS and social care, and we'll hear later, I'm hearing much more about the care crisis. Lots of these small businesses are also independent care providers, which at the moment are in crisis. We've been talking to much of them. Our research has shown us that this would push them into collapse. So there are unforeseen consequences of this type of rise. We see national insurance employers' contributions as a tax on jobs. So that's something we would question. We would question seriously. As for bus, again, that's like a tax on buses, a tax on the ability for people.
So will you vote against
Once
the budget?
Again, where would you be bringing forward? So obviously you have suggested on the banking side, but where else would the Liberal Democrats instead be bringing forward suggestions to make the significant? I mean, we know it's billions that's needed to invest to make NHS care. Yeah. So I think you've got. I can also say so. Other more, and we absolutely recognise the mess that has been inherited. It's disgraceful. But other proposals that we've said, coming back to energy, is that the supposed windfall tax that we proposed and Rishi Sunak brought in had a little loophole. And that little loophole was that those who invested in new oil and gas in the North Sea would get 80% exemption from that windfall tax. So that windfall tax brought in almost nothing. So we would close that loophole so that we could really get the real benefits of the windfall
and we just buy more oil and gas from Qatar.
David Goodhart, you've been very patient.
You have.
So, a bit of biog. I was a member of the Labour Party for about 30 years, so I feel a bit conflicted about this. I was quite enthusiastic about New Labour. I left because of Jeremy Corbyn, but also because the Labour Party had essentially become a kind of liberal graduate party. And it's true of most centre-left parties in Europe, they're liberal graduate parties. And I think, just bringing us back to the working people thing, Labour is so keen, in its appeal to the Red Wall, it was so keen to present itself as something other than the Liberal Graduate Party that it became about 25 years ago. And hence this sort of ridiculous muddle they've got into, because they wanted a kind of a bit of an old Labour sort of patina about themselves, Keir Starmer and the toolmaker father and all that sort of thing. I mean, it's true, and the cabinet is probably the most working class cabinet we've had since Attlee, minus all the Wickhamists and so on. I kind of wish them well. I mean, we've had all the tittle-tattle, we've had all the Lord Alley stuff, we've had all the Taylor Swift tickets, and this is a chance for them to actually show that they have been doing some thinking and they will do something positive for the country. I have to say, all of this sort of country before party stuff, the way in which they've described the inheritance, the exaggeration of the way they've described the inheritance has probably knocked 0.5% of GDP. I mean, economics is also about animal spirits and psychology and how people feel. And I do think they have used, obviously, they're borrowing from Cameron Osborne after 2010, and they blame poor old Gordon Brown on everything for everything, and that was unfair, and it's equally unfair the way they're doing that now. So the thing about country before party has been completely lost, in my view. The kind of disappointing thing is they've had all that time when they knew they were going to win the election, and they don't seem to have come up with anything very interesting or imaginative. Why not a land tax? Why aren't they doing council tax, the ridiculous sort of, outmodedness of the council tax bans, and they don't even seem to have thought.
When they run out of money, they'll move on to it.
They don't even seem to have thought about the distinction between the productive rich and the unproductive rich. I mean, that is what we want to. I mean, rich people already pay a hell of a lot of tax in this country, and actually, people on lower and moderate incomes have been relatively lightly taxed under the Tories. Equality has actually narrowed in the last 14 years, according to the LSE. I think it's just a bit disappointing that they're not coming up with anything sort of interesting.
Sarah, are you disappointed?
No, I think that the gap between richest and poorest has grown significantly.
No, it hasn't. Not in the last 10 years. No, it hasn't.
You can't all be right.
The wealthiest are paying more of a percentage of tax now than ever before. Ever before.
But again, if the public finances hadn't been so poorly managed in the last 14 years, then they shouldn't be in that position. We shouldn't, it's the first time, I think, ever that a government has inherited the two things simultaneously. The public finances in such a horrendous state, and I kind of reject the idea that it's a fiction. And secondly, that the public services are in such a bad position as well. And to take on those two challenges with them actually really closely linked, because the question around economic growth, as we know, with such a high number of people out of work because of health issues is, an absolute kind of massive barrier to unlocking growth.
Isn't a lot of that due to COVID, where the government spending £400 billion on furlough? I mean, inevitably that was going to rock the public finances.
And billions of which, of course, we know was wasted and has not been clawed back.
Not
and billions, there has also been billions of furlough money that was not used legitimately and within the rules. And also, obviously, we go back to how those procurement processes were managed and who the money went to and all the kind of scandal that followed from that. And, if the Conservatives were so kind of brilliant on the things that they sort of have previously claimed to be, then surely in recent years we would have seen a stronger kind of recovery on that. I mean, some of the other schemes that they funded also have been under really close scrutiny during COVID, where they tried to invest in young people's jobs and things like that as well.
Right, we will move on in just a moment. Not much agreement on that question, it has to be said. 18 minutes past 8.
LBC.
Love my Toyota Corolla, I do, love it.
On Global Player, this is LBC.
Right, let me reintroduce my panel. Lord Craig Mackinlay, Conservative peer, Sarah Smith, Labour MP, Pippa Heylings, Liberal Democrat MP, and David Goodhart, who's written a book called The Care Dilemma, Caring Enough in the Age of Sex Equality, and we'll talk a little bit about that a bit later on. Just a bit follow-up question to our last discussion from Alex in East London, who says, I'm a software engineering manager. I earn £140,000 per year and work about 60 hours a week. I pay the equivalent tax of 11 people who earn £30,000. Should I be paying more or less tax? Right, 30 seconds each on that. David?
He should be paying less tax. We've got all these cliff edges in the tax system, particularly the kind of higher up you go, you lose your child benefit, you lose childcare subsidies and all sorts of things. And I think it's really punishing the kind of upper 20, 15% of the population who are key people if you want to drive the economy and get growth.
Sarah?
We all want to be able to pay less tax, but I think he also wants public services that work. And that's what we need to prove that we're going to deliver.
Pippa?
Well, I think the people that are being sort of missed out in the middle of this budget are those who are small business owners and self-employed. And so we would be looking out to make sure they can be supported because they're hugely important to our economy.
Craig?
Alex will be paying the horrific rate of 62% between 100,000 and 125,000 and a bit. So he is getting massively taxed. As something I campaigned about. I am not proud about the tax legacy of my outgoing government. I think it was too high. But as you said earlier on, you can't spend close to £500 billion on COVID and expect there to be no outcome. But no, I want people like Alex to have a lower tax burden, so he'll be encouraged to do more work and be more entrepreneurial in everything that he does. I'm all for Alex.
Right, Sharon has got a text question. Can anyone explain how putting up bus fares will in any way help working people? Pippa?
Well, if we want to get people in work and we want to have aspiring young people getting to post-16 opportunities like getting to college or to apprenticeships or to other opportunities that there are. If they're living in a village like Bolsham in my constituency of South Cambridgeshire, that can't happen if they don't have buses.
My Auntie Anne and Uncle David live there.
Well, if you go and knock on the doors in Bolsham, as I've done,
I know it well. My dad was born there.
Oh!
Can you believe it?
Isn't it a beautiful village?
It's a lovely village.
Well, what the incredible
used
thing
to go to whist drives there. Can't say the same about yours, Sarah, I'm afraid. But I've put you off your straight now, haven't I?
I just love it because that is the kind of community that Bolsham is. Absolutely beautiful. But everybody said, from elderly people who are being isolated, kept at home, or younger people trying to get these, post-16 opportunities to get into work, those who are trying to deal with both caring for the elderly or for getting their childcare sorted, there is one bus a day. Now, that is just not enabling people.
Where does it go to? Because, Bolsham, for the uninitiated, is about, 10 miles from Cambridge? So you would think there's quite a lot of people that commute into Cambridge every day, but they can't go on the bus or get home on the bus.
Absolutely mad. So we would say that the £2 was absolutely fantastic, the take-up of that. But if you're talking about people who live in rural constituencies, they want to know that their actual buses, never mind how much the bus is costing. So first of all, we need the investment in public transport, and we think it's really good keep the £2.
And that is really important, I think, the crux of this, which is the £2 commitment finishes in December, and we've committed and brought forward with the £3, but that's because we've had an independent body advice that says that under the £2, the previous scheme was not sustainable. It was not going to be enabling us to have sustainable bus routes across our country. And so, again, there's no easy choices here. We are where we are.
It's a 50% increase. And if the Tories had done that, I'm pretty sure you'd have been jumping down their throats.
But this
that would have been in our dreams that the Conservatives would have done that. I'm sure put a £2 cap.
But this is the opportunity to make sure that this can be a much longer term commitment. And this again, it just goes to the point that there's absolutely no easy.
They're only guaranteeing it till the end of next year, so it's not a long term commitment.
But with the view that will, there will obviously be another budget as well in 12 months' time. And I think we're much better to be in a more sustainable option where we can start to make some of that investment and make sure that those bus routes and those buses are dependable. I grew up somewhere where there was one bus a week, I actually kid you not, that went in one direction.
Not back.
Yeah. so at least you get one a day, or one an hour. But serious note that we need to be looking at how we start to make all of this much longer term. And buses took a hit during COVID, didn't they? And I know, having been a local councillor that was responsible for kind of recovering the buses again. The challenges that the companies have taken, but we are also obviously going further than that and making sure that we return power to local people, to them to be able to make influence their bus timetables, because you hear time and time again of the silly decisions that are made by more like centralised companies, where so and so's a shift knocks off in the factory or in the care home, whatever, at a certain time, and the last bus went 5-10 minutes before. So we need to make sure it's not just about the price, but also the reliability and when they run.
Craig,
I used, as constituency MP in East Kent, buses were a very big part of my bag. There are some pockets of high density, but lots of rural areas as well. Now, this is a significant problem, and KCC every year got big pressures because of costs, social care and all the rest of it. They were looking at what supported routes do we simply have to close because they are not used. There's very few people on them, and it was, I think some of the routes, it was like £40 per head ended up being the support. I know there's the argument that if you have less buses, less people will use them, but with the Labour Party and Ed Miliband particularly on the whole net zero stuff, trying to get people out of cars, to increase the bus from £2 to £3 seems a very, very warped way of getting people out of their cars and into a bus. I would have thought just spend a mere fraction of the wasted billions they're talking about with their mad net zero dash, put it into buses. We could have kept it at £2 and kept a few people out of their cars. Would have made some sense, but there's not going to be much sense coming out of this government, I'm afraid.
David Goodhart.
Well, I'm old enough to have a free bus and tube.
Me
pass.
too.
Wow.
I don't.
What a joy!
But I kind of want.
You get free tube.
Yeah,
really?
Well,
I didn't know that.
I'm old. I'm old.
I didn't even know
I'm
you were
old.
missing out.
Things I've learnt on this programme.
You have one too.
I've got a senior road card.
How old are you?
62.
Well, I'm 68, so
No.
maybe that I'm
A few more years.
just qualify for more free stuff.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I'm afraid I don't know much about buses, I have to admit. But I am struck by. I mean, I wonder what proportion of people using the buses that we're talking about, particularly in rural areas, are actually old people who will have some kind of bus pass, so the £3 will not necessarily affect a huge proportion of the bus users. But what I really noticed the other day, I mean, just the amazingly high. I mean, if you don't live in a big metropolitan area in the UK and there isn't a tube or tram system like in London or Manchester or wherever, the amount of car use. I went to Oxford the other day and I was driving along that. There's a dual carriageway that runs past the Cowley plant, if you know what I'm talking about. And I got there, I happened to be driving at about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was, I assume there'd been an accident. There was a traffic jam going up to a roundabout. Yeah. And I was in that. It was still I was in that traffic jam for about 25 minutes, nearly half an hour. And I assumed there'd been an accident. I talked to somebody who lives around there, and they said, no, it's like that every day. Mm-hmm. And it was. I probably got there just
Cambridge, eh?
Yeah, just after the factory had sort of closed, a shift had ended, and everybody. I mean, Oxford actually also has pretty good bus service, and yet people want the control, don't they?
I'd like to bring two pieces of evidence in. So first of all, I think, as Sarah was saying, for council, so we've done research in Cambridgeshire which has shown that when you brought in the £2 cap in order to recover after COVID, because people weren't using public transport anymore, that moved up to over 80% increase in usage. So we've actually got evidence that shows you bring down the price, you put on the availability of buses, there is more uptake of the buses. However, the other thing, there's a fantastic study about the fact that people, the reason why they're in a car and not on a bus is, in a car, you feel you're in control. Even if you're 25 minutes every single day, but you're frustrated. However, when you go to a bus stop and the bus doesn't come and the information isn't up to date, you feel impotent, you're sort of angry because you don't know when you're going to get to the place you're going, whereas in the car you do. So it would seem that if we just have a faster, more reliable, cheaper bus service, there will be the uptake. Unfortunately, this measure, as we understand, this will only save £340 million. So we feel we should have the focus on keeping that uptake of the buses, extending for a further period the £2 cap, because it's tiny proportionally to the amount of savings that Labour needs to do.
The problem is, if you make that argument on every single measure, then you can't get ever to the big number. No. And we know that so many of the big options are, very much, according to because of our manifesto, absolutely, they're off the table. So you can't just ignore every increment, or you'll never get to where we need to, which is obviously investment in NHS and care and education, and public and broader public infrastructure investment.
I mean, this is something more interesting going on here, in my view. I spoke to the buses a lot when I was MP, and they'd found that the numbers had not gone back up to pre-COVID levels. And that is probably a permanent scarring that will never, ever come back. They haven't on trains
either, have they?
No, it's been a permanent scarring. I suppose you've got the working from home and all of that is a dynamic. And older people perhaps are still a little bit just shy of going out a little. It doesn't take a few percentage to actually knock that down. Now, if we end up in a world of autonomous vehicles, now that's an interesting proposal.
God help us
That is
all.
completely different. It will kill the bus completely, because you will go A to B in your own little vehicle, safe and warm, and all the rest of it. I mean,
many have been trying to make progress on this for the last 20 years.
Well, I think
now,
it will happen.
Very, very little progress.
They already have them in America. I was with Gillian Keegan on
I think
Friday.
in San Francisco they've got them, haven't they?
At LA Airport, she said she got a driverless car to take her to where she wanted to go, and it got lost.
That changes the whole dynamic of towns and everything else in due course, because you don't need big car parks. Because, would you own a car?
I have to say, London buses, I mean, having said I don't know much about buses, I do actually use one route in London, and it's extremely good. It's the 24 route from Pimlico to Hampstead. I live in Hampstead, my partner lives in Pimlico, so it's quite handy for us. They were threatening to close it, but I think because a lot of parliamentarians use it, it's been preserved.
Well, I have some devastating news for me from Sharon, who says to get a free tube pass, you need to have your primary residential address in London. Oh, the fact that I work here every day, obviously, it's got nothing to do with it.
That's why you're not.
So that's why I can't have one. Anyway, on that bombshell.
I think the car is the most liberating invention ever, because it takes you where you want to go.
Don't have a car, Pippa.
So no, I do.
You do, of course
and lots
you do.
of people do, and lots of people have to do. But the fact that there is no way we're looking at a future where every single person has to have a car or more than one car to get where they need to go from A to B. We just that as you say yourself, we're going to be going into a future where we've got demand management, where transport is probably a service. That is the future we're probably looking at. So you've just said one thing and then contradicted yourself, but I'm happy to kind of take this one up.
I believe in freedom, and I think cars equal freedom.
Right. Well, we'll move on to something else in a moment.
Freedom to sit 25 minutes every single day in that traffic.
You can listen to some nice music or a podcast.
LBC.
Exactly. I don't know what proportion of our listeners do listen in the car, but I imagine it's quite a
Does LBC extend to Oxford? Can you get all
We're national. Honestly, where have you been, David? We went national 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we went national.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, it used to. Leading Britain's conversation.
Oh,
Get with the agenda.
Okay.
8:33 on LBC. While I educate David in the last 10 years of LBC, Daryl Jackson has the news headlines.
The Work and Pension Secretary's told LBC the government has a plan to make work pay after announcing a cut to the cap on bus fares in England. Liz Kendall says Labour does want to put local buses into local hands, but there must be a firm budget. A judge has told Tommy Robinson no one is above the law as he was sentenced to 18 months for contempt of court. The 41-year-old admitted repeating false claims about a Syrian refugee. And the search is on for Erik ten Hag's replacement. The Man United manager has been sacked after the side dropped to 14th in the Premier League. LBC weather, most areas will have a rather cloudy night with patchy light rain and some fog patches, a low of 7 degrees.
This is LBC.
The plant
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:36 on LBC. David Goodhart is with us. Tell us about your book, David. Do you want to give it to me and I'll brandish it?
Thank you very much.
So everyone can see what a beautiful tome it is. It's called The Care Dilemma, Caring Enough at the Age of Sex Equality. Now, the main title, I suppose, is self-explanatory, but the subtitle intrigues me.
So, it's about the dilemma between freedom and investing in the care that we say we want as a society. And we have not invested enough in recent decades. That's pretty clear. But one of the reasons for that is a positive thing, is that women are now much freer not to care, and women have far greater opportunities. They can, train as medics rather than work in social care. I mean, probably a lot of the women who are training to be doctors now, their mothers or grandmothers would have worked in social care. So but because of this wider opportunity, we have a lot of areas including the family. I mean, we've undervalued the family, we've undervalued the domestic realm, and that is the negative side of a positive side of the coin too. And I think we just need a more honest conversation about that. And I think this undervaluing has had all sorts of knock-on effects in family instability. Again, this is a product of the freedoms that women and men have had to leave oppressive relationships and so on. It's been much easier to do that. So we now have a situation in which nearly half of children are not living with both their biological parents at the age of 14 in the UK. We have, of the parents of dependent children, about 24% are single-parent households. This obviously has a huge effect on poverty and inequality and so on. Indeed, one of the reasons why we're the most unequal society in Europe is partly because we have a massive financial sector. It's also because we have far larger proportion of single-parent families than the average is about 13% in Europe. So we haven't had an honest conversation about the family. We haven't had an honest conversation about how freedom has left us with insufficient care in many areas, and including one of the other knock-on effects is fertility. And we just heard the news today about fertility falling below 600,000.
Well, I get the feeling you could talk about this for the rest of the hour. But we do have questions coming in. Not only is David on the panel, Pippa Heylings, who's Liberal Democrat MP for South Cambridgeshire, Sarah Smith, Labour MP for Hyndburn. Where is Hyndburn?
It's Accrington Stanley Football Club. It's between Blackburn and Burnley, that part North West. And
Craig Mackinlay, Conservative peer. Right, let's go to a WhatsApp question from Vaz in Warwick. Is it time to look at updating some of Parliament's outdated conventions? The Speaker complained in the Commons today that Rachel Reeves announced changes to the fiscal rules to the media before she informed Parliament. Surely managing market reactions is more important than sticking to traditions. Well, Sir Lindsay Hoyle said that it's totally unacceptable and is supreme discourtesy that the Chancellor announced the changes in interviews during a trip to the International Monetary Fund meeting in the US last week, rather than in the Commons itself. Now, she's not the first Chancellor to do this. I mean, this has been going on for many years, but it was the convention that any Chancellor that effectively gave any budget information would have to resign, which Hugh Dalton did in 1947. Craig Mackinlay.
I'm a bit of a traditionalist, really, and I know Sir Lindsay is a good friend of mine. He was very supportive of me during my illness. I think he was very, very irate at times when we were in government, when ministers were saying things outside of the House of Parliament first, and he is continuing that now. And I think he's going to have a lot more to say about the budget, because it seems the Prime Minister today was saying a lot about what is probably in the budget, and I don't think that's going to go down very well either. It's a courtesy to the House. We are I'm not anymore, but the House is the elected representatives of this country. They should be consulted first, because they have a constitutional role to play, and it shouldn't be bandied around the media before these things are announced. So, I share his annoyance.
David Goodhart, you're the only non-politician on the panel. Can you get terribly exercised about this?
Not really, no. I mean, this was pretty... she wrote a piece in the Financial Times. I mean, this wasn't even a leak to a newspaper. She wrote a piece in the Financial Times, and I think the point that the questioner made is in some ways a valid one. I mean, that you These are sort of complex, sort of market-moving changes, and I think to sort of present it in a kind of orderly way, preparing the markets for it, if that means it's more appropriate to do it in the way that she did it, then I'm all for it. I mean, there's obviously something for about conventions too, but it doesn't bother me that much.
Sarah?
I think that there's a lot, hopefully, that we will look at with the modernisation committee that goes beyond this specific example. I also saw one of the shadow ministers being told off this morning for raising the name of a colleague without giving them a heads up of that beforehand, and so
just basic common politeness.
Yeah, there's some. So I think that we absolutely hold on to some of the old important traditions, but I think also, as ever, we need to be a modern government, and I am really looking forward, hopefully, to what the modernisation committee will consider, because I think there are just some very archaic ways of working. It's quite a surprise to all of us new MPs coming into it, and just realising sort of how sadly, in some ways, sort of far from the normal workplace it sometimes is.
What's the most weird thing that you've discovered?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think that having a bar open every evening, when in what workplaces do you go and have a few drinks when you're still at work? Not many that I know of these days, and also some of the sitting hours.
Well, that'll make you popular among your colleagues. Close all the bars, says Sarah Smith on Cross Question.
Or do you know the amount of opposition that they faced when they tried to put a nursery in because they took one of the 6 or 7 restaurants and bars that are in the Houses of Parliament away? So so I'm happy to have some of these debates because because I think it's how the general public trust in politicians is at an all-time low, and we have to make sure across the House and the way that we work that we are winning that back on every front. And I do think for most people it's quite a surprise to learn that
Is there a nursery?
There is, yes. The good news is there is a nursery.
I think maybe John would like this in terms of the freedom. The freedom to have a bar has just been lost because mums and dads can have a childcare place.
I mean, it's bonkers, isn't it? To be.
I'm sorry, but I find it a little bit odd that you've had the opportunity to visit the place. The place has run this way for a long time, and people get elected to it and they want to change it. I'm sorry. I mean, that is the job. It is the place. It is the tradition. It is how we do things. It's odd. It's anachronistic, but it is how we do things. If we don't like the place, don't stand for it.
I think what I found was strangest I had my family in the chamber. They came into the gallery. It was my maiden speech. It was all very sort of. It was lovely and all that. As you say, that's your one chance where you want
odd, you see what we do at the other end, in the red end.
One chance.
That is odd. Come to that in a moment.
But I hadn't realised that is your one chance to never be. Even if you go beyond the time allotted, it's the one chance where you will not be interrupted, and that's it for your sort of whole term. So there's this sort of very special moment. Everybody in that. So I was proud of me when I did my maiden speech. And somebody then next to a colleague, a Lib Dem, did their maiden speech in which they mentioned Sir Ed Davey and his record. In terms of renewable energy, and I clapped my hands and said, wasn't this wonderful? Oh my God. No, you were allowed to make as much noise as you want. Rah, 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 you can back your papers on the chair, but you cannot clap.
Apart from when you can.
Well, you can't.
No,
there are
it's a perfect example. Well, let's just talk about that because, I mean, I thought when you came back into the House of Commons after your recovery, I mean, that was, I was howling, and I'm sure most people were, even in there.
Yeah.
And that was an exception where people did clap. And when a Prime Minister sort of finishes, I'm sure, I don't know whether Rishi Sunak is going to get a clap on Wednesday when he does his, because that will be his last moment, won't it, doing the budget speech. Not quite sure whether he'll get a clap, but Tony Blair did.
Then? So there are certain, because the whole room went completely silent, and I got a tap on the shoulder, but this is not what you do.
Was that the room?
You mean
I knew it would be.
The Chief Whip, help me to be nice to you.
But of course, some things have to change. I mean, Craig, one of the big things that's changed is that it's 40% women now.
Yes.
And you know, and as recently as 30 years ago, it was like 4% or something. I mean, so it's got to change and adapt to the changing nature of our time.
It always will. It is actually remarkably adaptable. That is the beauty of our constitution. When you have constitutional crises like Brexit times and whatever else, it can adapt. That is the beauty of having an unwritten constitution and all of that good stuff. But yeah, the clapping in the chamber. Yeah, just thinking about that, I can almost sort of well up. Really, it was.
I mean, when
it was
you
amazing experience.
When you walked in,
and it was actually Parliament at its best because it was across the chamber.
Yeah,
Everybody, and I had some lovely emails from some Labour MPs who I hadn't really spoken to over my 9 years in Parliament, and they said, "Oh, I was in tears." It was emotional, and I've had. I walk down the street and I have old ladies come and give me a cuddle. It's quite
not young ladies.
No young ladies, thankfully, because I'm very happily married.
But what? I mean, when you were recovering, did you ever think you would go back into the chamber?
Yes, I always thought I would, but what was remarkable, I didn't know the 22nd of May was going to be the election called on that day. I could have easily that morning have said, you know what, legs are hurting a bit, let's leave this till next week.
Okay.
I mean, thank heavens I did do it, because I wouldn't have had that great experience. I mean, they say all political careers end in failure, but to leave, I think, on a high was a unique experience. It's a good time to bow out and leave them wanting more.
And had you thought about the reception that you might get?
No, I hadn't. I thought there might be a few, waving of some order papers, but I didn't expect the depth of that and the length that it went on for. And the speaker was, as I say, he was very kind to me during my illness, and he sort of nodded me the wink that you can pretty much do what you like, son. And he did. I mean, I didn't have a jacket on because I couldn't get it over my bionic arm. I had trainers on because I couldn't get a normal shoe over my artificial feet. We had clapping, and it was remarkable. And he allowed me to do a PMQ, which wasn't a PMQ. It was a valedictory speech, really.
Because you knew at that point that you were not going to be able to stand.
No, I thought the election was going to be October, November, and this was going to be my first day back of a sort of slow return. Yeah. So I didn't expect it to be my last day.
Right.
Yeah. So, but if you had to choose a day that is your last appearance in the Commons, it didn't get much better than that.
Well, we'll go to a break, but I want to hear from you what the House of Lords is like, particularly in your situation, and what the working environment's like. So we'll come to that in just a moment with Craig Mackinlay. It's 8:48.
LBC.
32 minutes.
With Iain Dale on LBC.
Welcome back to the Craig Mackinlay Show. Just a quick question before we go on to our next question, Craig. The House of Lords, it's how different is it from the House of Commons, and how difficult is it for people with disabilities?
I'd say with disabilities, it is no problem. The authorities are remarkably helpful to actually make sure that you can fulfil your functions. I mean, that does extend to, for some, being able to access remotely if you really need it. But no, they couldn't be more helpful. They found me an office on the first floor within the palace, which is quite unique. They're like the proverbial rocking horse doodah, but they found me one. They've been fantastic all round. But yes, it is an old building. It doesn't take well to modernisation. But no, I've found it's similar but different from the House of Commons end. You don't find that you've got such hard politics going on, and I like hard politics. I love hard politics. But you don't have hard politics so much because you're not having to do a 20-second clip for Facebook for your re-election campaign. So it is a friendlier place, and I think the quality of debate is actually better. I mean, I've got a lot of criticism of where the House of Commons had got to in terms of quite a devalued place where debate wasn't happening, where governments were too powerful. The whip system didn't allow independent thought because we're not stupid people. To get to be an MP, you've had to work hard. You've had a background, and that's everybody here. And I respect you all. But to be treated like, well, idiots a lot of the time by the whip system, I found a little bit insulting. I think it's quite devalued. And so I'm looking forward to more serious debate at the Lord's end and getting stuck in, as it were.
We can give my friend Jackie Smith a hard time.
No, that's what I was at the show the other day when she was on her feet. I mean, she seems
to be always at the dispatch box.
Smooth operator. Yes, she is.
Right, we need to get to a very important question from Sadia in Dagenham. Israel's parliament just banned UNRWA from working in Israel or Gaza and has instead called it a terror organisation. How can the UK continue to allow Israel to stop letting aid get to the desperate people of Gaza? Now, the Knesset has tonight banned the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees from being able to conduct any activities on Israeli soil, and has also voted to cut ties with UNRWA and designate it a terror organisation. These bills are due to come into effect in 2 to 3 months' time. Pippa.
This is such hard news to hear, really. I think, the situation in the region is a tinderbox, close to what really could become an all-out war in the region. And so we really need to call on all sides to de-escalate, both to reach a negotiated settlement, but also to get that humanitarian aid in. Now, hearing this about UNRWA, which is the aid agencies, the only way they were being able to get into Gaza and the Western Strip was because they were coming through Israel, because they'd stopped the entrances that they did have straight into the Gaza Strip. So they were then channeled through Israel, and now they're saying they cannot come through the Israeli territory, the Israeli country. So we know that we are on the brink of the worst humanitarian crisis we have ever known, with millions of people displaced. If you think about the situation for many women and children, we've just heard that getting the polio vaccination out to children who are 6 years old has not been able to be taken place. That will affect, in the future, just hundreds of thousands of young people's lives. We know that women are not getting access to any medical care. That's either, medical care if they're pregnant, that's postnatal care, even if they're suffering from problems, any kind of health care. Now, on behalf of our constituents as MPs, we have the privilege and the opportunity to meet people directly. And just this afternoon, I met with a group of both Israeli and Palestinian people. The Israeli
lady... I'll have to ask you to rush because I'm conscious of time.
Okay, so just want to say, so both Israeli and Palestinian people that we met today told us harrowing stories of what is happening, both in terms of the hostages and in terms of the persecution and the terrible humanitarian crisis in Palestine. Both groups said that the only way, one, to get the hostages home, and two, to bring peace to the area, is for humanitarian aid to get through now and for a peace settlement.
Okay. David Goodhart, part of the problem here isn't it, that presumably part of the reason why Israel's done this is because there were UNRWA employees involved in the planning of the October the 7th attacks?
Well, exactly. I was going to say, I mean, they haven't banned them just for the sake of it. They haven't banned them for fun. They banned them because they obviously have evidence that, UNRWA has been, attacking them. So, I mean, the question is, how does the aid get in through other routes? And, you come back to this question the whole time, what are the neighbouring Arab states doing to help provide the people of Gaza with support of various kinds? And are the Israelis stopping that? Or, I mean, why are they not stepping up? I mean, that's what I'd really like to know. And, of course, all of this, I have to say, whenever this issue comes up, you have to say what an appalling mistake the Iraq War was. I mean, all of this goes back to the Iraq War. If we hadn't had the Iraq War, if Iraq hadn't been destroyed and become essentially a client state of Iran, Iran would not have been strengthened. Iran's allies, Hezbollah and Hamas, would not have had we could have gone through the process of normalising Israel. Saudi Arabia was very close to it. It's just the dreadful mistake that we're still living with the consequences of the Iraq.
Sarah?
It's just really difficult, isn't it? And when to use the phrase "we're living with the consequences," I mean the consequences of people of Gaza and what they face. And I heard that it would take like 15 years just to clear the rubble, even if the fighting stopped tomorrow, before you even start thinking about the rebuild. And that's completely not taking into account the actual rebuilding of people's lives and the amount of trauma that they're going through right now, which is just totally unimaginable. I think what's important, the minister worked with international colleagues over the weekend to bring forward a statement, underlining our commitment to UNRWA and once again calling upon Israel to make sure that aid does get through. And we've got to use every bit of our diplomatic efforts to continue to push on that, whilst doing all that we can to try and de-escalate and find some way through here. It just is so incredibly difficult.
Craig?
Yeah, well, it wasn't very many months ago that the British government actually agreed with the Knesset. We had sort of denied funding to UNRWA because of the concerns that it was embedded within the Hamas organisation. It's changed under this government. I'm sure the aid will get through other ways. UNRWA was not the only aid provider. But let's not forget. I mean,
if we haven't seen it get through so far.
The Knesset is the head of a democratic country called Israel. There are no other democratic countries in that region. And at any time, any day that you fancy, Gaza and Hamas could release the hostages, and that would be a step forward towards the negotiation of a settlement and a ceasefire. They do not do so, and one has to wonder why. I mean, on this, yes, of course we don't like to see at all women and children and innocents being dragged into this war, but I'm afraid that is the nature of war, sadly. That's
why I have humanitarian rules, actually, and we do know that there's evidence of going against humanitarian
rules. It wasn't the Israelis who came over the border and murdered thousands,
but now it's
1,200
war, and there
Israelis.
are humanitarian rules of war.
Well, I'm going to bring that to a close because we're running out of time, apart from our fun question, which is from Rich in Oxford. 1 in 10 of us takes sneaky naps during the working day while we're working from home. When was the most embarrassing or awkward time you've dozed off, and did you get away with it? Craig?
When I was leading a team at an audit, when I was when I was a chartered accountant auditor, I had the team out in a building society, and there was this lovely boardroom, and I had a nap, and I'm not sure I got away with it, but the junior staff, I think, were too frightened to wake me up. But I used to love a little nap when I was working at home, but that's long gone. Thing of the past, unfortunately.
Sarah?
Well, I've got a 7-month-old baby, so every sleep feels a bit like a nap to me right now. And last week, because he fell asleep at 5 a.m. or something, I took a nap or went back to sleep and woke up with a word I won't repeat on here because I realised I was running late for a briefing at number 10.
13 seconds, it gets to 9 o'clock, so you can. David?
I have a sluggish thyroid, and I used to often sort of dip in the afternoon particularly after lunch. I mean, I only realised a few years ago that I had this, and I now don't do it so much. But I was interviewing Yvette Cooper for a piece about housing, and she was going on and on and on and on and on. I definitely, my lids closed at some point.
I interviewed Tony Benn once, and he did fall asleep in the middle of the interview, and I was sitting there thinking, what do I do? And I just waited for him to wake up.
Well, I don't have these little naps. I know you're supposed to actually have them as power naps, but the one story I can tell was of my dad, who had sleep apnea, and he found out because he dozed off on the front row of a sleep apnea conference. And so he didn't get away with it because he got diagnosed on the spot.
Well, I fell asleep on the 11:46 from Woking to Yeovil on Saturday. I was speaking at Yeovil Literary Festival. Unfortunately, I woke up in Axminster, which is 2 stops down. Luckily, there was a train back quite quickly. But unfortunately, we don't have time to get to this question from Chris in Kings Lynn, who says, do the panel think that Iain should be elevated to the House of Lords for services to broadcasting? What a shame I don't have time to get your views on that.
Yes.
Well, Craig, you're in a position to make it happen. On tomorrow's panel, Conservative MP and former party chairman Richard Holden, former Gogglebox star turned Labour activist Josh Tapper, the writer and non-affiliated peer Baroness Claire Fox, and the Plaid Cymru MP Ben Lake. They'll be here to take your calls from 8 tomorrow evening. Thanks to all 4 of you for coming on. Hope to see you all again very soon. And coming up in the next hour, an investigation by LBC has found that local councils are experiencing a surge in the number of complaints concerning the condition of social housing and, as a result, facing ever-increasing repair bills. Figures from 120 councils across England, Scotland and Wales obtained under the FOI Act show